Thank you very much. Good morning. I am delighted to be able to talk to you about a topic that is near and dear to me, diversity, inclusion, and respect. I'm a second-generation diversity consultant. My father was born and raised a farmer. He was one of 12 brothers and sisters. My grandfather had no goal for his kids but to be farmers. It was sports that got him off the farm and to college. And then he went to Cincinnati with a wife and 5 children to get his PhD in psychology and then to work as an internal consultant for Procter & Gamble in the early 70s and left there in the mid-70s to start his own business and to help start the diversity industry. So my father was a diversity consultant. My mother was a preacher. You're going to kind of hear both of those in my voice. My father died at a very young age of 48 years old of a massive heart attack, or I'd probably be working with him today. But I interned in his company and grabbed some things from him that are a part of kind of how I see things even today. This subject is one that I am so delighted to be talking about in this at this time in our country. How many of you get a sense sometimes that it feels like we're in the midst of ideological civil war? Right, and so we've got to feel, and so I believe that there are some of us that have a responsibility to rise above partisanship and even our perspective and fight for our country. So I personally was moved last night by General John Kelly. I felt that every time I would see him speak, and he didn't take very many opportunities to speak when he was working for the president. But last night, for an extended time, we heard his voice. And I was grateful for that as an American and as a patriot. And so I'll talk to you then about diversity, inclusion, respect, significant impact on the bottom line. So as we look at this, there are some business realities that I think that we have to kind of deal with. One is sort of increasing global diversity. I looked at we're still working on trying to improve gender diversity. How many of you are familiar with Title IX? Right? In 1971, I believe, Title IX was enacted. And I don't know if we really, I'm certain that people did not realize then the impact that it would have now. But how many of you watched the women win the soccer? I mean, my goodness, we were moved by that. And what we've seen is that since the enactment of Title IX, I think I heard somebody say that women's participation in sports has increased by 1,700%. Oh, my goodness. How many of you had a chance to see that young lady, Coco Gauff, at the Wimbledon? I went into the Panda Express to get some lunch, and when I went in there, they had a TV up, and she was down like 6-3. She had lost the first set. She was down 5-2, I think, the second. So I thought I'd sit there and watch the burial, like, okay, she's going to wrap this thing up. And she came all the way back, and I said to myself, I mean, when she won, I saw men hugging each other on the ground. I was like, oh, my goodness, this is how we bring our country together, It's through sports and through caring about each other and through people having the opportunity, because ultimately we're talking about talent. There's a widening ideological and skills gap. We have, in many ways, an increasing lack of trust in our leaders. Some research says that 63% of people don't trust our leaders. Why is that? Anybody have any sense why that is? I would suggest to you that because there's oftentimes less time spent with the people, and too often consultants like me have advised people on how to communicate messages in ways that make them sound better, when sometimes we just need to learn how to kind of tell people the truth in as straight a way as possible. There's a heightened battle for talent in the skilled and technical areas. Preparing for Gen Xers is something that's really important. I've got a few of those in my household, and certainly some of the demands that they bring are interesting. I see that organizations are now in a place where we've got to adjust our culture in order to be attractive to talent. You've heard people speak about this over the last day and a half, that right now I think that we have 7.5 million jobs available in this country and only 6 million people to fill those jobs. So we've got far more jobs than we do have people. And so we're going to have to find creative, innovative ways to get talent on board so that we can get the work done that we're trying to do. And then young people are looking for us to sort of take a stand on oftentimes social issues. These are some definitions that you may be familiar with. When I first started doing this work, I felt like my job was to sort of be a diversity ghostbuster. So in 1991, that's when I started doing this work. I thought my job was to be like a diversity ghostbuster, to go into organizations and sort of root out the racist, sexist, bigoted homophobes. And so I kind of went at it like that for about 2 or 3 years. And then I recognized that my job was to, in many ways, be transparent around my own biases, that bias is a human condition. How many of you would agree with that? That bias is a human condition, and all of us have bias. And so when I started changing the way I approach this, I started seeing different results in how we were able to impact organizations. When I first started doing this work in 1991, I almost calculated that I was going to lose a third of the class because I might call somebody a racist or sexist. And then a third of the class was going to be on the fence, like I'm not sure if the guy's crazy or sane. But the third of the class that I won over, that they were going to change the world. And then after about 2 or 3 years of that, I said, well, I don't think this is working. And so I changed the way that I approached it. I started becoming more transparent around my own biases. I started giving people more grace. I really believe that everything that I know is less important than caring about people. And I believe that the greatest tool that I bring to my business and organizations is the ability to love and care for people. And so I believe that we have to be able to use that L word that says, I love you, I care about you. I care about what happens to you and your children. And so these are some definitions that I think are important. Diversity is certainly the ways in which we are different. Inclusion is us sort of making a conscious choice to make people a part of what we're doing. Now, the next step is to realize that change doesn't happen overnight, and we have to be intentional about it. I think sometimes we need help, a helper, to help us translate what we're hearing. Because sometimes, because of the filters that we have from a lifetime of being socialized, all of us can be tribal, if you will. And it's hard for us to hear messages that come from diverse people that are different than us. So I think getting a helper to help you do that, but sitting down with people and asking them this one question is a starting place. Help me to understand, what might I be missing as we seek to create a culture where you feel as great about this as everybody else. And I'll tell you, if you do that and are willing to listen, that is a great starting place. And then build a strategy. Change has to be intentional, and change happens over time. I'd give all of you one place that you could even start with. Look at the values of your organization, and then ask yourself, what are the observable ways that people can demonstrate values, those values? And are we measuring that? Because oftentimes, if we even look at the values that we put so much time into writing up, those beautiful values about integrity and respect, a lot of times our employees are being frustrated as they walk under those into the cafeteria. So I think your willingness to have the conversation and to get professional help. I can tell you, during the time that we're living in right now, professionals are failing at this conversation because the temperature is so high in our country. And so we've done work with protesters and police officers in the same class. The only way you can be successful there is you have to demonstrate mutual empathy. You have to understand why protesters protest. You have to understand why police officers are stressed out because of low pay, not having the equipment, many of their families being torn apart because of the stress. If you can't have mutual empathy, then it's hard to work with them. But I think that you're headed down the right street. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. One last question, please.
I'm sorry.
One question. Do you love work more than you love golf?
Yes, I do.
Everyone, please give Eric a round of applause for his dynamic presentation. Was your mother a Baptist preacher by chance? Because
No, she's Church of God.
Oh, Church of God. Okay, I'm also very familiar with that. Religion as well. I wanted to say at one time the doors of the church are open because certainly he kind of took us to church on how we should value diversity and inclusion and a new way of looking at that and how to mitigate the backlash of it. So thank you, Eric. That was a really big highlight of the day, I think.